Hey, it's Drybear. Today, I'm going to cover everything you need to know about the first phase of the Legion Commander Raid with Valtan, and as always, I'll split the video into two parts. The first part, I will cover all the important mechanics in just 60 seconds. And in the second part of the video, we'll go far more in depth with all the mechanics for anyone who's looking for extra help. So let's go! But first, if you have any questions or comments for me, you'll find me live every day on twitch.tv/Drybear. Who knows? I might even be streaming right now. Let's begin by covering Valtan Phase 1 in just 60 seconds. The Raid Leader can activate 3 different Esther summons. Thyrain does damage, Way does stagger, and Balthor protects. Bring cleanse items and whirlwind grenades. The wolf will start combined, then split into a red and blue wolf, and then recombine at the end. The red wolf applies a stacking bleed that creates a line attack at 3 stacks, so cleanse this. When both wolves are out at once, they must be separated. Raid members will get a red or blue target on them that will draw the corresponding wolf aggro. At X30 and X15, the white mechanic starts. 8 orbs spawn around the boss of alternating color, and the boss starts a stagger check. You must pass the stagger check and also grab orbs in the correct order or you wipe. Typically, players grab them in this order. You can skip the stagger check by having the raid leader use Way for bonus stagger, while the other party members kite their orbs. After the second stagger, the boss will recombine with all abilities as you finish the fight. Ooh, okay. Now let's dive into the first phase of the Valtan Legion Raid, with more detail and without the time restriction. First, let's go over the overview. Items to bring for this fight are Panacea and Sacred Charm, as the Red Wolf does apply a stacking bleed that is excellent to cleanse and clean off yourself, as well as a fear later on in the fight. You can bring whirlwind grenades, and it's recommended for the 2 stagger checks that can wipe you. And of course, time stop works in almost every encounter. Next, let's talk about the sidereals, or the Esther summons that we'll have for this encounter. This is a brand new mechanic that we haven't had in Lost Ark in the West before. And how this works is it's basically like a limit break or like a party-wide ultimate. The bar will fill up in the top left corner of the screen, and when you fill this bar all the way up, the raid leader will get the option to use one of the 3 summons for some effect during the encounter. Just playing the fight normally will fill the bar, and for later on, which is more important in phase 2, you can also pass counters or successfully counter bosses to fill the bar faster. Your 3 options are Thyrain, Way, and Balthor, and they all do different things, but let's simplify what their effects are. Firstly, Thyrain is your big damage dealer. He does more damage than Way, and of course, with Balthor doing the more of a protective effect, he is your damage dealer. So if you feel like you're doing the mechanics properly, you would want to lean on Thyrain just to get through damage checks and kill the boss faster. Way, however, does a little bit of damage. It's a moderate amount of damage, but then he applies a big chunk of stagger. And since this fight has 2 major stagger checks, I'm guessing that early progression for people that are just learning this Legion Raid will lean on Way for those stagger checks. If you plan it out properly, you can use it on both, although it's pretty hard to get the meter to line up just right. But you can also just pick one of the 2 and use Way on it in order to get the stagger check passed. And lastly, you have Balthor, which gives a damage reduction to everyone around. It prevents all white mechanics. You can't be one-shot. And it does give you CC immunity for most CCs, like push, like knockback, and stun like that. There isn't really anything in first phase that you'd want to use Balthor for, but he comes in super clutch in several occasions in phase 2. And a quick note I'll give on this is that only the raid leader can use these with Control Z, Control X, and Control C by default. If you ever need to transfer, I've never done this myself, but I've heard that you can, if the raid leader's dead and you're close to finishing, you can transfer raid leader to someone who's alive, and they should be able to access it mid-combat. Now let's dive into the big gimmick for the fight, the thing that is going to probably be the most challenging at first for people before they understand how it works, and that's going to be the stagger checks that happen at X30 on the health bars, and then X15 as well. And then it will follow with a stagger check in the middle of the screen. Before you begin, you want to set everyone up with their positions. The easiest way to do this is to use 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock, 4 o'clock, 5 o'clock, 7 o'clock, 8 o'clock, then 10 o'clock, and 11 o'clock. So all 8 players are distributed in a clock pattern, skipping the 12, 6, 3 positions that are listed here, and 9 as well. So you're all laid out here, and this is where the orbs will spawn, which, by the way, is a good reason why we use clock positions instead of just north, west, and south and east, because then you can actually use a little bit more precision as you place your players here. At X30 and X15, the stagger check will start. The wolf will spawn in the middle, start a stagger check, and then you'll see these orbs spawn all around you. So again, these are the positions that you'll find the players in that you just started at the beginning of the fight. And the goal here, you have 2 major goals that you can choose to accomplish in whatever way you want. The first is you need to pass the stagger check, or it is a raid-wide wipe. So if you do not pass this stagger check in time, you will wipe. The second goal is that you need to grab the orbs in an alternating color order. If you break the order, it will be a wipe. So with those 2 things in mind, here is the most popular strategy for solving this. Since you're already in that order, all you have to do is just follow the clock and let one person, so the person in 1 o'clock position, grabs the orb, attacks the boss. Then 2 o'clock grabs the orb, attacks the boss. Then 4 o'clock, 5 o'clock, then 7, and then 8. And then usually by this point, the stagger check has been passed. And then in the positions at the top, for 10 and 11, they just have to make sure they don't grab their orbs. They just kite them around, and you should have the stagger check. For this reason, it's good to have players in the first 3 or 4 positions have their highest stagger. So if you have, destroyers, scrappers, artillerists, gun lancers, berserkers, sorceresses, anyone of those that have really high stagger, you'll want to put those up front because you'll get through the stagger a lot quicker. For every stack that you get as well, it will increase the stagger done. So for the players that are later on, you want to put your lower stagger players later on, and then when they do pick up the orb, they'll be able to activate and go into the boss. And what's cool too is if you notice on the boss itself, it does have a stack for every time an orb is collected. So if you know that you are number 6 in the order and you see that 6 is up ready to go for the orb thing, you can grab that based on the debuff. Now remember, you will be able to use Way on at least one of these based on the timing. So you'll be able to activate Way to give a big chunk of stagger. So what some players do as a strategy is they will just have the raid leader grab 1 orb, use Way right away, and that'll immediately break the stagger or do about 80% of the stagger bar, and then they can just finish off with a whirlwind grenade with a singular buff. And that's enough for you to break the stagger. And what some teams will do is a strategy called All 6, which means that all players go to 6 p.m., 6 o'clock down at the bottom of the map. And then, so all of the players are coming down here at the very bottom, and at the very top is the raid leader all alone, and then you're just gonna have them kite the orbs. So that's one way to pass the check. I'm guessing that a lot of teams will use this early on, because Way does give you a nice chunk of stagger. The only thing to think about here is that if you're not going to be using Thigh Ray, you won't get a big chunk of damage, and so you will make sure that you have to deal enough damage to push him through the phases without the mechanics getting too much to bear. And that's the big gimmick of this fight. So getting this down and with coordination is going to take some practice for us as a community, but also for your individual raid teams to get this down. Just remember, you have to pass the stagger check and collect the orbs in an alternating order, or you will wipe. Now let's go through each of the phases and talk about the individual wolves mechanics that you'd like to know. It will help you defeat this boss. It will start out at X50 as the purple combined wolf. And the mechanics here are very straightforward. Most of these you'll figure out just by facing them and watching them happen. But once you get to X45, he will transition and split into 2 wolves. The red wolf and the blue wolf, and then the blue wolf will disappear. The blue wolf has tons of attacks that apply a stacking bleed. So you want to be dodging these as much as you can, especially even if you're a tanky class like a gun lancer or a destroyer. Don't be tanking hits, because when you get to 3 stacks of the bleed, it will trigger a line attack that will attack across the arena and can hit everyone else in your group as well. So if people are getting hit by the bleeds too much and stacking up too much, you'll see these AoEs trigger and start dealing damage to everyone along the way. And that looks like this. So anytime you see one of these lines shoot across the screen like this, it means that someone hit 3 stacks, and then a big attack will come across. So just be wary of that. Make sure you're dodging those, and if you have to, use Panacea or Sacred Charm to bring the stacks down. Special attack for the red wolf is going to be the tornado, and how this works is he will create 2 zones. He will spawn as a tornado here in the middle and become a tornado himself, and then he'll create this circle around the outside that does have a knockback on it, so you'll have to dodge through it to get through it. This is super important because if you get too close to this tornado, he actually wrecks. I mean, this tornado does so much damage. If you let it get close to you, it'll shred your HP bar. So you want to be very careful about staying away from it. Usually what people will do is if they're in the group that has the red, they'll either run around if they're being targeted, or they'll just dash outside the ring and then wait for it to end. Next, the blue wolf will spawn as an invader. He's the intruder in this case. And then you'll have two wolves on the screen at once. You'll have red and you'll have a blue. And a few things happen once this triggers. First is the aggro for each of these bosses is no longer random. So the red boss will choose a player and put a marker crosshair above their head, and then the blue boss will do the same. And so you'll have two players in your raid that has a mark over their head, and if it's red, it means the red boss is following you, and if it's blue, it means the blue boss is following you. So typically what people will do, as you can see on screen here, is they'll do red at the top of the screen at 12 o'clock, and then they'll put blue at the bottom of the screen. And the reason you separate these two is if they're next to each other, they do have a buff that will reduce damage taken and generally just makes it hard to complete the fight. So you have to keep these wolves separated. So generally red will just take it to the top and then blue will go to the bottom. However, there's an additional mechanic in this, and that is the golden buffs. You'll actually see that a couple members of your party will get a golden buff at random, and they'll glow gold as well. So you can see them glowing on screen. If you are glowing, it means you deal bonus damage to whichever wolf is intruding. So first you fight the red wolf and the blue wolf intrudes. So the golden buff will deal damage to the intruder. And then later on when you're fighting the blue wolf, the red wolf will invade and it will be reversed. If you have the golden buff, you do more damage to the intruder and you're unable to damage the other wolf. So an easy way to test this is either look at your buff bar, see if you have the gold, or look at the glow around you. Or what some people do is they will just attack one of the wolves, and if they see damage, they know that they're good to go. If it says no effect, it means that you have the gold buff and you go attack the other wolf. And you pass this phase by dealing enough damage to the intruder to make them retreat from the fight, and you're good to go. You'll keep fighting the wolf that was already out. Now, at X35, the red wolf will start applying a stacking darkness debuff on you. And when this gets to 5 stacks, you will be feared, you'll be mesmerized, locked in place, and then the red wolf will start grabbing people that get this debuff. So you can cleanse this again with Panacea, you can help your teammates with Sacred Charm, and then Gun Lancers and Paladins can help cleanse it as well. So if you get 5 stacks of the darkness buff, this is bad, you'll get grabbed up. So while you're managing the bleed stacks, make sure you're also managing your darkness stacks, and if anyone gets locked in place, make sure you break them out of that mesmerize, and then you'll get out of the way because they'll be dashing through and grabbing people. At X30, you'll get the stagger check mechanic, and then the red wolf will disappear, the blue wolf will enter, and the fight will continue just in reverse. The blue wolf will be your main target, and then eventually the red wolf will invade, and you'll have to do the same mechanics again. Now, the thing to know about the blue wolf is that he has this elemental claw on his arm that will start out with no glow, and then it'll start glowing, and he'll do different attacks based on what glow color it has. So if you see him that looks like this, he's doing just normal claw attacks moving around with no glow there. But then as it starts to glow, so you'll start to see a blue glow, a green glow, or a red glow. So right here, you'll see the blue glow on his arm right here. That means that he has an ice attack primed. When he attacks with this, he'll shoot out a whole bunch of ice projectiles that will freeze you. So you'll just have to, so you'll see this land on the ground right here. These will explode and send ice projectiles in all directions, and you'll want to avoid them so you don't get frozen. Everyone's gonna have a different solution on how to avoid these when these come out. I like to dash into them, or like to get just kind of like a long distance away. But you can also, if you're really quick on the draw, you can see where the projectiles that he launched into the ground were. You can kind of see based on their positioning where there's going to be gaps. So you can see as these come out, based on the direction there, you can see that there's going to be some gaps here, so you can stand in between. Just make sure that if you get hit by them, you will get frozen. If he has red, it will do big AoE explosions. So you'll see this kind of trail here that comes down like this. It'll come down and it'll create these red, like molten patches on the ground. After a short delay, these will explode and deal massive damage. So when you see the red attacks, you just got to get as far away as you possibly can. And you'll see these big explosions, lots of damage. You can shield, you can time stop if you have to. That may be the easiest way to deal with it. But if you see red, try to get some distance and avoid the explosions. And the green function, just like the red and the blue, again, he'll throw down these little markers that land on the ground. And the red is the big explosion, the blue is the projectiles, and the green is the inner safe area. So for each green, you'll have this kind of like inner circle that's safe. and then this big AoE will go around it. So what you have to do is find a situation where there's a green on the ground that's by itself, and then you want to stand on top of it. So you can stand, like, assume these are green, you can stand right next to it, or you can just try to outrange it. Then at X25, the red wolf will come in as the intruder, and as we talked about, the buff will reverse. If you get the gold buff, you'll deal more to the intruder, and you want to make sure that these are separated, because if they're standing next to each other, they will get the armor, the protections. You won't be able to deal damage to them. So separate them, move one to the top, one to the bottom, and then kill them down. And if you have a buff, try to focus on the intruder, because if you're doing no damage, you can switch. Then at X15, he will do the second stagger check with the orbs. So he'll do this big attack, spawn in the middle of the map, and then start doing the stagger check. Typically for this one, this is where people will use Way, just because it's later on in the fight. You'll do a big stagger bonus, chunk him down, and then finish that. And what happens is right when you pass this stagger check, then you'll go into the final phase of the fight. The red and the blue will recombine back together into the purple. The purple wolf will have all of the attacks of the red and the blue combined, so it'll be avoiding everything. But you got to be careful about the transformation. So right when we hit 15, we pass the stagger check here. When he recombines into purple, he'll do this big room-wide AoE and start exploding and sending projectiles out everywhere. So he'll have this big AoE around him that you'll want to avoid, and then he'll start sending these projectiles in all directions to start dealing damage. So what you want to do is, as soon as you see 15, you pass that stagger check, just start spreading out, going to the edge of the arena, watch out for the AoEs, and then you want to slowly work your way back in. These projectiles will shoot out, he'll do AoEs all over the place, so it's very easy to get caught in all these and start losing players when he transforms. And then he'll be in the purple state, and you can see that the purple now has this glowing green arm right here, so you know he has green projectiles again. So you'll be doing both the bleed stacks and all the red effects of the red wolf, and then all the effects of the blue wolf as well, and you'll finish out the fight all the way until the end. So if you haven't used your meter, your second meter here, what some people may do is they'll do Way on the first stagger check, and they'll do Thigh Rain for the last part of the fight. And if you're feeling really frisky, you can do an advanced strategy where you try to use Thigh Rain on both wolves when they spawn. So you have to pull them just far enough apart where they won't get the buff on them, but close enough where Thigh Rain's attack will hit them both, and you'll get crazy damage scaling out of that. But once you reach this point in the fight, it's just about dodging mechanics, keeping alive, making sure that you're, not dying, and then finish the boss off and you're good to go. So if you make it here, you're in a good spot. There's only one new mechanic you have to be aware of. Periodically through the last phase, you'll see him slam the ground and make this big purple explosion, and then he'll mark one player when he does this in the raid, who will then be feared when he's done. And when that person gets feared, they want to ping themselves aggressively so that everyone in the raid stacks up on top of that person and gets right into the right position. Because what will happen is when that person's marked, he will blink on top of them and then start a stagger check. So you want to get together so you can pass the stagger check really easily. You'll stand on top of each other, pass the stagger check, and then you'll just continue the fight as normal. The person that gets marked can also use an awakening or a dash, or cleanse themselves if they get hit by the fear, and then just ping themselves so everyone knows where to go. And then you pass the stagger check. And that's it. That's all there is to phase 1 of Valtan, the mechanics themselves and everything that you need to know in order to complete it. I hope this guide was helpful and clear to you, and I want to wish you luck in your grind. I hope you get great loot and you have huge clears on Valtan Phase 1 and beyond. If you enjoyed yourself today, leave a like down below. You can support me and my work on Patreon and view Patreon exclusive content. Link in the description. Thank you so much for tuning in, and I'll see you in the next one.